Okay, so Dr. Brown, in the middle of your talk, you mentioned medicine wheels.
Mm-hmm.
I have one half of this question and someone else wrote the other half.
Uh-huh.
My first half of the question is, please tell me more about what that is, because
Oh.
I'm not familiar.
Sure, sure.
And then the other half is, Dr. Brown, can you share more about how the medicine wheel inspires all that you do?
Yeah. Um, um,
Oh, yeah, sorry, they're on the
oh,
table.
sorry, okay.
Failing.
No, we're good. We're good. There you go.
Oh, thank you.
I think we're live. Yeah, so, is this one on? Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the medicine wheel, it's just, it takes a lot of forms, but it's basically framing things in four, very basic and fundamental in most indigenous tribes, for colors, for directions. It's just always a way to divide up things into four. And so you can see a lot of variations of that medicine wheel. But in our school, it's really about the directions. Each direction has its own teaching and power. The four colors, same thing, its own teachings and power. So it's just become a very useful symbol. And so again, for me, like I say, in looking up Google for energy, it's a lot what you see as far as a medicine wheel, how they frame it, like in terms of the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, those domains, way to unpack it and frame it. But the medicine wheel itself is just a very fundamental symbol that's been around for centuries. But it's a way to frame things in terms of four. It's very significant.
Thank you. All right, this question is for Amy. What are the indicators of readiness to explore TPS, or some indicators? Specifically, what are schools/teams asking themselves? What kinds of questions? Ooh. Okay.
Ignore about that next part.
Okay, just ignore it. All right.
Good question. So I think a couple things. One is it has to come from the teachers. It can't be something that a district or an authorizer or the state says, you're going to be teacher powered. That's like not teacher powered. The people who are doing the work actually need to want to do the work, excited about the work, invested in the work. And really at the center of all of it is our relationships with each other and with our students and our families. So I would say a key indicator for readiness is trust. Does this community have trust between its members? And that's what you can build on, because you can't do that work without it.
Excellent, thank you. Another teacher-powered structures question. How much is pre-planned versus adapting on the fly? How do high-performing teacher-powered schools manage this timing and adaptability?
Great question. Like all school sites, and like you just shared, absolutely, sometimes you just can't plan, because in a day in the life of a school, if you spent even 3 days at a school, you will know that what you planned for the day doesn't usually end up being what happens during the day. And so the way they don't stop everything and collectively come together and make a decision, that is inefficient and not effective and really unrealistic. But they have done a lot of work, these teams, on shared purpose. What are our priorities for our school? What is our mission? What is our vision? What are our goals? And so the person who's ever in that admin role, who's ever in a lead teacher role, who's ever dealing with that in that moment, makes that decision based off what they know their school community and colleagues would want, because they have spent the time creating that together. And so they can confidently make decisions in that space, knowing that that is aligned to what their team has collectively decided. And the rest of their team, partly because of the trust building, can trust that this lead in the science department or the math and the family and community engagement lead will make a decision that we would agree with, because we have spent time developing that together.
This is another question, but it's related. Can you share any examples of decisions made at teacher-led schools, or what do the schools look like?
Yes, lots of decisions. So let's take budgeting, for example, because budgeting is always a really interesting one to dig into. At a teacher-powered school, they might decide given their budget, whether they have partial or full budget autonomy, they may look at the budget together. They may do a lot of work to understand the funds and the logistics and what you can spend money on and what you can't, because there are a lot of limitations. What happens in the general fund doesn't come through. Different states do it different ways. But so let's say they have a set of money, and they may choose, at a traditional model, a principal might say, okay, we're going to evenly divide that between the grade levels, or we're going to evenly divide that between the departments. At a teacher-powered school, they're going to look at it more holistically and say, okay, we have X amount of money. What do our students need? Do they need improved science equipment? Maybe they do. Maybe we really want them to focus on real-world relevancy, and so we need to invest that into internships, or we need to invest in buying a school bus so we can actually take the field trips we want to do that will benefit all of the students. But that's the kind of decision that they're going to make together. And they will think about, everyone will have a chance to advocate, to think about what they will, to go through the pros and cons. But then they'll make that decision, and they'll own that together. They'll know that they were part of that decision making.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Brown, this question is for you. When you learn what gives or sucks your team's energy, have you been able to adjust any structures in response?
Yeah, good question. Yes and no. There's a lot of little low stuff that I can kind of address. That's kind of my little weekly, check that I can try and see what I can address. There are some things that are more, structural and bigger and as you mentioned, there's just a lot of guardrails to the public school system that I can't really do in a year as a principal. So, but a lot of it is kind of more low-level stuff in the school of just, I keep losing money in the pop machine, things like that. Those things I can kind of address, But so a lot of low-level stuff I can. Some of the bigger stuff is kind of more like just, well, that's something to think about for next year. Or, but a lot of stuff. It is a nice little weekly check to kind of try and figure out what barriers I can remove.
And do people feel like they can, do teachers and education assistants, teachers assistants feel like they can come to you? Like, is that mechanism of the Google form that you've set up, like normally the way that people will share those things?
They do that on the form, but they also just come to me and my AP. I think we're pretty approachable, and folks are pretty real about and transparent about their needs. So they share in all sorts of ways. Yep.
All right, more questions. I love it. Thank you. Amy, can you say more about how TPS authentically involves families or shares power with families?
Absolutely. So really, I would say that comes from a mindset of we're looking at all of an assets-based approach to our students. When students come into the building, they're not blank, and we're not filling them. They come in with their own set of experiences, their cultures, their identities. And the people that know them best and shape them are their communities, their elders, their families. And families are going to look different in different environments. And so really meaningfully involving families is, one, creating trust with them. So many of families today have had their own traumatic or poor experience of school. They don't necessarily feel safe in a school building. They don't necessarily trust the educators there. And so part of that is unpacking that and understanding that and really looking to build trust and help them understand that they're on the same team. And then inviting them to participate, not just once, like at a teacher-parent conference, but multiple ways, multiple spaces. And that often involves going to their homes, going to common spaces in their own communities where if they're not comfortable on a school campus, they have another place to interact with the educator teams there. And so building that trust and then getting them to be partners in the education.
This is a question for Dr. Brown. What can community members do with money, gifts, or service to contribute to the care of school communities right now?
Well, great question, and thanks for asking that. One thing when I talk about restrictions and guardrails, there's hardly any real mechanism to buy or pay for food for staff. and it's real. And so I'm trying my best with my AP to buy things and foods for snacks when we have meetings, because there's no real funding mechanism for that. So honestly, any donation probably comes into our building, we form it into food for our staff. It's a different energy for meetings, it just really is after school, and there's no real federal formal way to fund it. So one great way is any donations, it's more flexibility and less guardrails on things like that. So that goes for food for staff, and that's a big thing. Yeah.
And my husband has been an education assistant for a couple months now, and the first few weeks, like, he'd forget his lunch. And it was like, what does he do? He can't leave.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Fortunately, the school lunch staff were very kind. And
Good,
like, just
good.
take something.
Yeah, gosh, that's good.
He's in
good.
special education. He needs his food.
Yeah, for sure.
So for Amy, question for Amy. Do those who bristle at comparing schools to organizations or businesses, how can we reframe the reference point for high performance?
Good question. Schools are not businesses. That's absolutely true. When we looked at high-performing organizations, we were careful not to just look at for-profit businesses, to look at other professional partnerships such as law firms and medicine and clinics. We also looked at things like nonprofits and orchestras, and it turns out that many successful professional fields use that. I would say, personally, I don't love the analogy of business, because business is you're creating a product that's meant to be consistent and the same. That is not the goal of schools. Our schools are meant to create the learning environments where students can become productive members of society. And that's going to look very different based on their interests and their skill sets and what they want to do. And so it isn't a product in the same way, and I totally understand that.
Excellent. Dr. Brown, what gives you energy?
Yeah, good question. Well, I'm an introvert, so I kind of go home and I charge by being alone, and I make music and I make art. So I'm doing that evenings and weekends. I'm just doing a lot of that stuff, and it does fuel me. I like to do that. Introvert kind of has a bad word. It's not like I don't like people. It's just that but interacting and conversing all day, every day, it does kind of, I need to kind of just recharge by myself. And so I found I've been gifted. I have some gifts that I like to make art, I do photography, I make music. Just creating is kind of what kind of gets me back in my game.
Excellent. I work at Springboard for the Arts.
Oh, all right. Good to know. Good to know.
Look us up. Amy, what do you see as the role of district leaders and school board with teacher-powered schools? There's a note that says, I was struck by how educators feel very accountable to decisions they've made.
I think that school boards, districts, authorizers absolutely have a role at teacher-powered schools. And I think teacher-powered schools really appreciate the guidance and wisdom that those educators and school boards can give to their teams. What they want to be in partnership. They don't want a set of decisions coming down through a large district, or they don't want a school board who has never actually spent time at their school with their students. They're not looking to sever the relationship or not have to be accountable for their decisions. They're looking for partners who will take the time to understand the students that they're serving and be allies for that, will go out in the community and advocate for their school and for their students, who will help them create internship opportunities, who will bring in some financial resources. Those are how you can be an ally to these schools and these educators. Just telling them what curriculum to use isn't helpful, but there are lots of ways to be helpful to teams.
Dr. Brown, another question for you that occurred to me. You shared how that first grader kind of sparked this whole idea for you. Have students shared any other ideas about how they replenish their energy?
No, that's a great thing I think we got to start exploring now. I'm surprised some teachers haven't done that yet. But I would like to tap into that and be real with them too about what's replenishing them and filling their buckets. We talk about filling their buckets, but again, post-pandemic, I think it's much more real. It is a full kind of post-trauma thing we're dealing with staff and students. So I think it's a good idea to tap in with the kids too about where they are and how do they get their energy back. So yeah, it's a good thing to explore.
Excellent. Another question from Amy. As TPS intentionally moves towards sharing more power with students, how do they authentically create collective autonomy that includes students?
Good question. It looks different in different places. I think Avalon is a good example of that in the local area. Avalon's school governance model includes students as a voting branch of their government. And so students, modeling democratic decision-making, they create bills. Yes, technically the teacher team could veto a bill. They try not to do that. They try to go back and they try to compromise and they try to talk about it. And it's not just about prom, it's about cell phone policies, and it's about why are adults in the building allowed to be on their cell phones, but students are not. And if we're really a part of the same community, is that equitable? Is that fair? There might be reasons as an adult you're on your phone, but there might be good reasons as students on their phone. And so it opens up space for students to really become active and give them agency in creating the school that they believe in and own and are excited to learn in.
I believe this question is still for Amy. Given the national teacher shortage, especially TOCAIT,
Teachers of color.
Thank you. I'm like, I'm not sure about that. What do we know about how TPS schools fare with teacher satisfaction and retention? What data is or will be available?
So Dr. Sarah Kemper studied basically the working conditions of teacher-powered schools, looking at schools across the nation, and she found overwhelming evidence that teachers stay longer at schools, that they are happier being at the school site, that they feel ownership over their work. We are in the middle of a teacher retention study that's looking at pre-pandemic, what were your teacher retention rates? During the pandemic, and as we're emerging from the pandemic, what are they? It's not complete, but early data shows what we believe to be, that yes, at teacher-powered schools, teachers have higher retention rates. We knew that anecdotally, but we needed the data around that. Most interesting, I think, actually, is some studies coming out of California that look at retention rates of teachers of color, specifically Black and brown teachers, at schools that are community schools that use this collaborative leadership model. And early data also is coming out that shows they also have higher rates because those teachers are indicating that they really buy into and have helped co-create schools that are really serving Black and brown children well. And so they want to stay. They want to be leaders. The other thing is that many of these schools, those alumni are coming back and becoming paraprofessionals or teachers or some school counselors. And so they're becoming that community. And so it is coming full circle a little bit, which is what you would hope to see in a thriving community.
Right, one more for Amy, although I do see other questions being jotted down. Let me check our time. Oh, let's see, racing the clock, I'll talk slow. What are some questions, activities, or exercises important for educators to consider as they begin their TPS journey? Context note for Amy, equity guide questions, define equity, being ready for the work.
Okay. So I'm trying to think where that was going. I think that no one goes into teaching thinking, I just want a 9-to-5 job. No one goes into teaching not really caring about kids, right? I mean, unlikely. So I think it's really important as teachers think about Why do you want to be an educator? What are you trying to do? Because on good days when you're an educator, yes, you may go home physically tired, but your energy is high. You know that you've made a difference in a child, whether that's something they learned or something, a relationship you saw blossom, whether it's a family that came in and you really just got a sense that we're together in this. And so Education Evolving has an equity guide for student-centered learning. And a lot of what that equity guide does is to ask questions of the team and to help teams rethink things or see things through a different lens and consider different perspectives that will move you forward in terms of equity, in terms of not just equity in this vague sense, but like actually for the students at your school. How can you make this a learning environment where they will thrive, where every child will thrive?
Excellent. And kind of in the same vein, Dr. Brown, I want to bounce a portion of that question to you. Like, how can, speaking of the energy piece, like what are some things, steps, ways that folks can take to be mindful of that as they're working in the school?
Yeah, we're just asking that every week a little bit more and more. And again, we kind of run up against some guardrails and some things that just restrict, they kind of set the tone and the structures for public ed in a way that you wish you could kind of push and flex some of the union issues and things, so it's more of a, what you're talking about, a lot of things are kind of prescribed, and how you spend money, who has to stay longer or not, and when the contract dictates a lot of things. So to kind of counter that then with the energy, I was kind of trying to cultivate a vibe. I guess I just have to be really transparent and real and authentic with my staff. And so they do approach me about what's going to give them energy. It's individual, even in a building. So I don't really do a lot of staff rah-rah things, because if I have 100 staff, it's 100 different ways that they get their energy. So it's individualized, but I just kind of listen. I think honestly, out of a pandemic, that's probably the best thing I can do as a leader is listen. People are still processing and unloading, and I'm just there as a quasi-counselor some days, and I think that helps the energy. I'm a good listener, and so I lean into some conversations. So probably for me as principal right now, the best thing I can do is just listen like I've never done before, and just try and be flexible as I can in the structures that we have.
Right, if there are no other questions coming in, I do want to have one more question to Amy. Oh, you do? Okay.
It was the one that
Oh, yeah. The runner brings the question.
can't reach.
Go gadget arm.
What policies, systems might leaders interrogate to create/develop structures that promote sustainable energy management practices? What do you think is possible in teacher prep, new teachers, etc.? Dr. Brown. Little question.
All of that, all of it. Yeah, I ask myself that a lot. There's a lot of different entry points, and what can I impact? What branch can I shake? I guess for me, one big thing, I don't know how to crack this nut, but it's the contract, human resources, just dictates so many things about time. Like I said, time is a bully. It sets up everything from how many days you can have off and what those days are like. Family bereavement in my building is kind of a nebulous thing with different definitions of family. And is it a 3-day thing or a 5-day thing? It's all very prescriptive, overly prescriptive, I think. And I would love to have some more mechanisms to pull and flexibility around leaves, because what we're seeing last year and this year is teachers need a day off here and there. And they take a sick day or a personal leave. And it's kind of this weird, I don't want to say shameful, but it's kind of under the radar and everyone knows it, but they don't, and you have to plan for it. I would love to be that more transparent and just like call it a certain flex day or mental health day, be real about it. Everyone gets one a month. I don't know, but just build it into the year Because right now we don't, and it hurts us in the end to try and get subs that way. So just be real and plan for it. Just be ahead of it and just build it in. So that has ripple effects for staffing and subs, but I just see the need of teachers having to tap out here and there and replenish for a day, and they shouldn't have to take a sick day and have us all kind of scramble that day. Just be real about it up front and plan for it and plan around it. That would be a whole different energy in a building if I could do that. But that's, you know, that's union stuff. That's a contract. That's tough to really jiggle too much. But that's one big thing. I'd love to kind of get flexible with the HR language about leaves and sick days. That's one big thing off the top of my head.
In teacher-powered schools, Amy, is that mechanism present where folks are able to take that time?
So some teacher-powered schools, so we think of autonomy that teacher teams can have in 15 different areas. So that would be scheduling autonomy. It could also be workday autonomy. Some charters have it, but in district models, where we've seen it the most is in the pilot schools in Los Angeles, Boston, and New York City. And in those cases, the team has flexibilities from the collective bargaining contract that allow them to create different working conditions and schedules at their school site. And based on that, then they can create more flexibilities to allow for that. They can also do things like in HR where instead of cutting one teacher, if you're doing budget cuts, two teachers could decide to go, 50%, or someone's doing, you can be a little bit more creative that way. So yes, but not all teacher-powered schools.
Last call for questions. I'm looking over here. No, okay, just taking notes. Awesome. All right. Well, I am so grateful to everybody for their great questions. Thank you for being in conversation with us tonight. Thank you, especially to our incredible presenters. I'm always so lucky that I get to sit and chat with these folks. Thank you so much, Amy Youngie and Dr. Tim Brown.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.